Two bodies that exploded on screen. Two hearts that, behind the scenes, never knew how or if they would survive. He was the world's rock icon, she the vibrant storm of charm and talent. When the cameras of Viva Las Vegas stopped rolling, what was left was an impossible passion, heavy with desire and destiny. Get ready. This love story will shake what you thought you knew about Elvis. The year was 1963. At the MGM studios in Hollywood, a different kind of energy began to take shape. Elvis Presley, already crowned the King of Rock, was about to begin filming a new motion picture called Viva Las Vegas. On the other side was a young Swedish-American actress named Ann-Margret, emerging as one of the greatest promises of the time. She was beautiful, charismatic, and had a glow that lit up any room she entered. When the two met for the first time, something happened, an immediate, almost tangible chemistry that went beyond the script, the lines, and the cameras. From the very first rehearsal, the studio realized that something more than acting was taking place. Elvis, used to working with actresses who revolved around his charisma, this time found someone who matched him in presence and energy. Ann-Margret was different, spontaneous, fearless, sensual, and playful. She had the same sense of rhythm, loved motorcycles, speed, and music, passions Elvis also carried within him. It was as if he had finally found a woman who understood him in essence, without the need for words. The two spent hours together during rehearsals, laughing, joking, and sharing confidences. The film crew said the atmosphere between them was electric, that a single glance was enough to ignite the set. It was inevitable that something more would be born from that connection. Each day, the friendship grew more intimate and the emotional bond deepened quietly. Behind the scenes, rumors began to spread. Were Elvis and Ann-Margret living a romance off camera? No one knew for sure, but everyone felt there was truth in the looks they exchanged.
The film itself reflected that connection. Viva Las Vegas wasn't just a musical comedy about racing and glamour, but a showcase of a real love disguised as fiction. The dance scenes, the songs, and the exchanged glances carried an intensity that audiences could feel, even if they didn't understand where it came from. The chemistry between Elvis and Ann-Margret was so powerful that some critics claimed she had stolen the spotlight from the king himself. And that, of course, caused tension behind the scenes. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, didn't look kindly on that relationship. He feared Ann-Margret might distract the public's attention and, worse, interfere with the carefully constructed image of the star as a man accessible to his female fans. Meanwhile, Ann-Margret was becoming a sensation. Her vibrant energy and natural charm captivated not only audiences but also Elvis's heart. He saw in her something few people understood, a woman who shared the same loneliness that fame brings. They were both at their peak, but carried a deep need to be seen beyond the spotlight. And it was that identification that drew them even closer. During filming, there were moments when they completely forgot the cameras were there. The way they looked at each other, the smiles exchanged off-set, everything revealed an intimacy that transcended work. The songs they performed together seemed to gain new meaning. It was as if each note was a silent confession, a conversation between two hearts that knew it couldn't last, but also couldn't be contained. When the film was released in 1964, the impact was immediate. The public noticed something different about that story. The sparkle in their eyes, the natural gestures, the lightness of their laughter, everything seemed too real to be just acting. Viva Las Vegas became a tremendous success and, at the same time, the beginning of one of the most intense and secret chapters in Elvis Presley's life.
And what do you think? Did this love between Elvis and Ann-Margret go beyond the boundaries of cinema? Leave your comment. I want to hear your opinion about this electrifying beginning of their story. Behind the scenes, however, consequences began to surface. Priscilla Presley, who at the time still lived with Elvis at Graceland, began to sense the rumors and absences. Colonel Parker demanded that Elvis end any involvement with Ann-Margret, fearing a crisis in his image and the erosion of his popularity.
It was the eternal battle between the man and the myth. On one side, the artist and his feelings. On the other, the idol and the machine that sustained him. Ann-Margret, even young, understood the weight of that situation. She knew Elvis was torn between duty and desire, between his career and the truth in his heart. In later interviews, she would say that what they lived was an uncontrollable force, a consuming passion, but one they both knew couldn't last. Still, during that brief period, they experienced an authentic connection, marked by complicity, respect, and affection. What began as a simple professional partnership turned into one of the most remembered love stories in show business. A meeting that lasted only a few months but left deep marks on both. For Elvis, Ann-Margret represented the freedom he rarely could live. For her, Elvis was the restless soul that reflected what was most human behind the myth. And although the world only saw the shine of Viva Las Vegas, what existed beyond the cameras remains, to this day, one of the most intense and mysterious passages in the King's life. In your opinion, did Elvis make the right choice by following the path of image rather than the path of his heart? Comment below. I want to know what you would have done in his place. After the filming of Viva Las Vegas ended, what began as a behind-the-scenes connection turned into something deeper and more intense. Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret began to meet away from the studios, in private moments, avoiding the curious eyes of the press and the executives who controlled every step of the King's career. They lived a love that was, at the same time, an escape and a prison. It was as if the outside world ceased to exist when they were together. But when the curtains closed, reality came rushing back with full force. Elvis was a divided man. On one side was Priscilla Presley, the young woman waiting patiently at Graceland, shaped by the expectation of becoming the perfect wife. On the other, Ann-Margret, a vibrant, independent woman with a rising career and a free spirit. She didn't depend on him, and perhaps that was what attracted him most. Ann was the reflection of the energy he missed, spontaneous, unpredictable, alive. While Priscilla represented stability, Ann represented the storm. And between these two forces, Elvis found himself with no escape. The press began to sniff out what was happening. Although they both tried to hide it, the intensity was evident. When they were together, there was something impossible to disguise. The way they looked at each other, the way they laughed at the same things, the silent complicity. Magazines began publishing rumors about a possible engagement, and the story spread quickly. For the public, Elvis was the symbol of American fidelity, the man every woman dreamed of, and who, in fantasy, belonged to millions of fans. A romantic scandal could be costly, not only financially, but for the image carefully built by Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel was blunt. He called Elvis in for a conversation and made it clear that the relationship had to end. He believed that the affair with Ann-Margret put the singer's future at risk, especially because there were already plans behind the scenes for a marriage with Priscilla. The Colonel saw in that marriage an opportunity to reinforce Elvis's image as a family man, the kind of narrative that calmed the press and kept fans loyal. Elvis, pressured and torn, began to distance himself from Ann-Margret, even though his heart insisted on staying. Ann noticed the distance and understood what was happening. She knew there were greater forces at play: contracts, image, money, and expectations. Even so, she never spoke publicly about the relationship in a sensational way. She kept what they had lived to herself, describing years later as a love that went beyond understanding. In her memoirs, Ann revealed that she felt connected to Elvis in a way that went beyond passion. She saw him as someone who carried the weight of an empire, but also the vulnerability of an ordinary man who needed to be truly loved.
While the world watched Elvis prepare for marriage to Priscilla, Ann lived through a silent process of farewell. She too began to move on with her life. In 1967, she married actor Roger Smith, doing so with the same respect that Elvis had always shown her. Even apart, the two maintained a relationship of mutual affection and admiration. When Anne premiered her first season in Las Vegas, Elvis sent flowers, an arrangement in the shape of a guitar, a symbolic gesture that would be repeated for nearly a decade. It was his way of saying that, despite everything, she would never be forgotten. Behind the scenes, however, the separation left scars. Close friends said Elvis spoke of her with a kind of quiet melancholy, something between longing and resignation. He knew he had chosen the right path for his public image, but not always the truest one for his heart. Anne, in turn, said she preferred to remember him fondly, as a sweet, gentle, and intense man. She never treated him as an unreachable idol, and perhaps that was the secret of their connection. She saw him as Elvis, the man, not the myth. This phase of Elvis's life shows the internal struggle between the artist and the human being. While the world saw him as the king of rock, inside there was a man trying to balance love, loyalty, and duty. And that duality is what makes his story with Ann-Margret so remarkable. It was a passion that had to be restrained in the name of fame, a true love that time never erased, even when both went their separate ways. The story also reveals a side of Ann-Margret that many people don't know. She could have exploited that romance to gain fame, but chose silence instead. Years later, when asked about Elvis, she replied with a single phrase that said it all. "We shared something very special, and no one will ever fully understand what it was." That simple and honest answer is proof that, behind the spotlights, what existed between them was real.
At that time, Elvis was at the peak of fame, but emotionally vulnerable. Ann-Margret represented a refuge, a pause from the pressure, a reminder of what it felt like to feel without calculation. But life demanded choices, and he chose the path imposed on him. Even so, the bond between the two never disappeared. It lived on in discreet gestures, shared memories, and glances that, even without words, said everything. The love between Elvis and Ann-Margret may not have withstood time, but it became something greater. It turned into a symbol of what is pure and impossible at the same time. A reminder that not all love stories need a happy ending to be eternal. Some simply exist, intense, brief, and forever remembered. After they went their separate ways, Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret never again experienced the same closeness they had during the filming of Viva Las Vegas. But the emotional bond between them remained, invisible and constant. Both built new lives, new chapters, but always with the memory of that love that never completely faded. It was like a song that kept playing softly, even when the rest of the world had gone silent. Ann-Margret married actor Roger Smith in 1967 and maintained a solid union with him until his death, decades later. She devoted herself to her career, establishing herself as a respected star in Hollywood, and avoided talking publicly about Elvis. When she mentioned his name, she did so with sweetness, but also with a reverence that made it clear how delicate that bond was. In rare interviews, she said that Elvis occupied a very special place in her life, and that there were things between them that could never be understood by anyone who wasn't there.
Elvis, on the other hand, lived a life marked by contrasts. Between the 1960s and 70s, he dove headfirst into his most intense Las Vegas era. The grand shows, the lights, the crowds, and the constant applause hid an exhausted and often lonely man. Behind the scenes, however, he continued to show gestures of affection toward Ann-Margret. One of the most well-known was sending guitar-shaped flower arrangements whenever she premiered a new season in Las Vegas. The simple, silent gesture said more than any declaration. It was a living reminder of what they had shared. Over time, their routines took different directions. Ann-Margret maintained her career at a steady pace, appearing in films, musicals, and television shows. Elvis, meanwhile, faced the pressures of fame, the exhausting routine of performances, and the weight of being a living legend. Despite this, there remained between them a feeling of respect and mutual gratitude. Neither of them ever spoke badly of the other, nor sought to turn the story into publicity. On the contrary, both treated the past as something sacred, something that deserved to be preserved with silence and elegance.
During the 1970s, Ann-Margret became a highly regarded actress, nominated for an Oscar and recognized for her dramatic talent. Even so, Elvis's fans continued to see her as the woman who understood him. She represented the human side of the king, the side that laughed, loved, and lived with intensity. And perhaps that's why, to this day, the public holds her in such special regard. Among the women who passed through Elvis's life, Anne was the one who most maintained an image of loyalty, respect, and genuine affection. When Elvis passed away in August 1977, Ann-Margret was one of the few people outside the family to discreetly attend the ceremonies at Graceland. She didn't give interviews, didn't seek cameras, didn't say a word. She was simply there. According to reports, she cried silently, stayed away from the chaos, and, upon leaving, was comforted by her husband. For those who watched from afar, that gesture said it all. It showed that, despite the years, the feeling remained alive. A love that, though it could not fully bloom, never ceased to exist. After Elvis's death, Ann-Margret avoided taking advantage of the connection for attention. When asked about him, her answers were short and full of restrained emotion. She said she kept wonderful memories and considered him one of the most remarkable people she had ever known. Her loyalty remained until the end, and perhaps for that reason, Elvis's fans adopted her as a figure of respect, a silent guardian of one of the most romantic stories in the king's life. Time passed, but the memories of that relationship continued to echo. In several biographies about Elvis, Ann-Margret appears as the great love that could not be lived, not only because of the obvious chemistry or the beauty of their relationship, but because of the purity of their feelings. She represented what Elvis sought and rarely found, someone who understood him without judgment, who saw him beyond fame. Time passed, but the memories of that relationship continued to echo. In several biographies about Elvis, Ann-Margret appears as the great love that could not be lived, not only because of the obvious chemistry or the beauty of their relationship, but because of the purity of their feelings. She represented what Elvis sought and rarely found, someone who understood him without judgment, who saw him beyond fame. In the years that followed, Ann-Margret remained focused on her career and personal life, but she always made it clear that Elvis was still present somewhere in her heart. She never denied his importance, but she also never exaggerated it. She spoke with the maturity of someone who knows that some stories are so intense they don't need endings to be eternal. This final stage of their relationship reveals something few people realize. Love sometimes survives absence. What Elvis and Ann-Margret had didn't end dramatically. It didn't dissolve in fights or accusations. It was a gentle closure, yet filled with feeling. They understood that life demanded different paths, but that memories could remain alive, untouched, like a song that plays in secret. Decades later, when Ann-Margret was asked again about Elvis, she simply smiled and said she still felt him close. That phrase sums up the essence of their story. It's not about an interrupted romance, but something deeper, a bond that withstood time, distance, and even death itself. The love between them transformed into memory, respect, and longing. And, in a way, it continues to echo through both of their stories, like a song that never ends. And so ends another unforgettable chapter in the King's story. A love that didn't need a stage, spotlights, or a happy ending to become eternal. Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret proved that some feelings simply never die. They only transform into memory, music, and longing. If this story moved you, and you believe Elvis's legacy deserves to stay alive, now is the time to be part of this community that keeps the King's spirit burning. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Leave a like if this story touched you, and comment below what moved you most about the relationship between Elvis and Ann-Margret. And of course, share this video with other fans who also carry Elvis in their hearts. Because when we share these stories, the King's voice never goes silent. It keeps echoing generation after generation. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we'll continue celebrating the life, the art, and the eternal legacy of Elvis Presley.